I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming online.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the characters and plot to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and
and
enjoy
enjoy
Stream
Stream On.
On. Today, we'll be reviewing In a Lonely Place, streaming on Amazon Prime.
Dixon is a screenplay writer in need of a new hit. He gets the chance to adapt a popular novel, but the woman he brings back to his apartment to give him a synopsis winds up dead. His attractive neighbor Laurel provides an alibi and starts up a relationship with him. She finds out that he has a dark, violent side. But did he commit murder?
In a Lonely Place is a 1950s film noir directed by Nicholas Ray, written by Andrew P. Solt and Edmund H. North. It's based on a 1947 novel, In a Lonely Place, by Dorothy B. Hughes. The film stars Humphrey Bogart as Dixon Steele, a screenwriter suspected of murder, Gloria Graham as Laurel Gray, Dixon's gorgeous neighbor, Frank Lovejoy as Detective Brub Nikolai, who's investigating the murder, and Martha Stewart as Mildred Atkinson, the murdered coat check girl. So, Jeff, you picked this film. Why did you pick it?
So, this is one of the most interesting film noirs that I've seen. On the surface, it has top notch performances, really good dialogue, a plot that is both engaging and has some really good plot twists, and a fairly satisfying ending. What makes this more interesting, though, is that it very successfully subverts genre expectations, as it starts focused on a crime, but changes in an interesting way into a commentary on relationships. That's why I picked this.
Okay, well, let's jump into the plot analysis. So, as a writer, Jeff, what were some of the things you picked out about this film?
What I really liked about this film was the sophisticated way it addressed relationships, in particular a doomed relationship. Dix, our protagonist, winds up not being the killer, and we can get more into the ending later, but he is a violent and abusive person. The fascinating thing about this film, and why I think from the writing end it shows the kind of plot sophistication, is that it doesn't jump right out and immediately and say, this is what this movie is about. It really starts out as a more standard film noir in the sense that you have kind of marginal character. I mean, Dix is a formerly successful writer in Hollywood. You can see that his career is on a downward trajectory, and in fact, that is stated numerous times. He also doesn't fit in with where Hollywood is going. There is a very early scene in a restaurant with one of Hollywood's new breed of directors, a person known only as Junior. And you can tell that Dix and the people that he came up with in Hollywood, his agent, some of the other directors and producers that he interacts with, they're part of that old world, and there's this new world that he isn't going to fit into. In many ways, that is a very noir kind of setup. You have this person that, even if superficially they seem successful, they are on the outs, on the margins, and they're coming up to a crisis point in their life. And then you get the murder. And again, that is very in keeping with the kind of film this appears to be. But then it goes way off into left field about midway through and becomes a very different kind of film, which really gets into the relationship between Dix and Laurel and how a relationship that seems doomed to begin with actually is doomed. So, what did you think about how this film started and then became something else? So, Steph, what did you think about that plot change?
I loved how this film subverted expectations because it very much starts off as that whodunit, right? Which is your classic film noir. And you think that's going to be your A plot, and the Dix Laurel relationship is going to be your B plot. But as the film progresses, it really flips that, and Dix and Laurel's relationship really becomes that A plot. And like, who did it is it's in the background, like you care about it because it impacts their relationship, but it's less important than watching their relationship unravel. And I think the deeper message of what this film is about not the a murder and the death of a person. It's about the death of a relationship, and how two people with their issues coming together can exacerbate issues instead of be healthy in a relationship. And that's really what you see with Dix and Laurel. It's the relationship gets murdered because of these two people's character flaws that they can't overcome. And it's so well acted. So Dix, I would say his main character flaw is that he is hot-headed. He has some violent tendencies. Like we get indications of that early on. He has a bar fight scene. Later on, we see the road rage. Like it starts building up that like violence.
We actually see that in the first scene that he's in, where he's driving through the streets of Los Angeles in the night, stops at a stop sign, car pulls up next to him. There's a couple there. The woman had worked on one of the films he had written and basically says hi. Her husband immediately gets his, back up, and Dix is ready to start fighting this guy. Dix is I would say not just hothead. He is consumed by this quiet rage that bursts out throughout the film. The fact that he has any admirable traits is a testament both to good writing and to Humphrey Bogart's performance, because he does come across as charismatic. You can see why people would want to be around him, even though based on most of his actions, he should be in a lonely place because he's a pretty horrible human being.
It's so well acted by Humphrey with the eyes, right? You can see he like changes his eyes just slightly, and you can tell, oh, that violence is about to come into being. Like that, the quiet rage is bubbling up as the eyes shift. It's Humphrey's a great actor. And so, yeah, it's this idea that he is this brilliant writer stuck in Hollywood working for the man, and he hates that about himself. He sees himself as a sellout to the Hollywood machine instead of being able to do what he really wants to do with his writing. And as a result, you can tell he's just angry about life and pushes people away. But he does have that like charisma at the same time that attracts someone like Laurel to him. And it does escalate. Like you see it up front, but then as the film progresses, it escalates. I think because of the effect that Laurel has on him and their chemistry, but also like they use it as a way to get you to think he may be guilty of murder, because you can see how he's a violent man and he could easily have murdered the Martha Stewart's character. So I think they also do it to sort of trick the audience into thinking he could be guilty.
One thing the film does is set up a world in which male violence is fairly endemic. Dix is only noteworthy because of the level and rapid escalation, not because necessarily what he does. His best friend, Brub, who is a detective who is working on the case of the woman he is supposed to have killed, he being Dix, at one scene, he is almost talked into strangling his wife. And he seems to be getting off on it when you're watching this. It's about a quarter of the way through the movie at a dinner between Dix, Brub, and Brub's wife. And Dix is kind of talking about how the dead woman could have been killed if she was sitting in a car with her boyfriend. and Brub and his wife are acting it out, but within the space of about 30 seconds, Brub is strangling his wife, and she has to push him off. And it's a very disturbing and well done scene. Most of the men in the film are violent to some degree. The only one who is a primary character who is not is Dix's agent, Mel. But Mel is an enabler. Near the end of the movie, Dix punches him and almost puts an eye out, and Mel just kind of shrugs it off.
Yeah, he's very much like, oh, he's a troubled writer. That's just what he does. Like the Dix gets a lot of passes for being the troubled writer in Tinseltown, and if you're brilliant, you're just going to have these character flaws.
Yet there's a line that literally speaks of that, where someone says he's a writer, people like him can afford to be temperamental. He's just not temperamental. He almost beats one guy to death.
Mm-hmm. In the road rage incident.
Right, where he and Laurel out driving after he found out that Laurel has been talking to the police behind his back. He gets involved in, I don't know, a fairly minor little traffic incident, and he starts beating this guy and is about to crush his head with a rock. And Laurel, thankfully, is able to talk him out of it. But then they drive off, and it's like, as far as Dixon's concerned, nothing really seems to have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the environment these people live in, and the environment that all of the women, except for one, enable. Laurel puts up with from Dix. Brub's wife is clearly not happy about almost being strangled, but doesn't have any long-term repercussions. Dix's former girlfriend, who he apparently beat, she just kind of shrugs that off and clearly is still interested in him. And you see a lot of that with most of the female characters, the only exception being Martha, Laurel's masseuse. So I don't know, what did you think about that kind of commentary on endemic violence with men and how women mostly put up with it until it's almost too late in Laurel's case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign of the times and the gender roles in the 1950s that this film was made in, I believe it was 1956. But also, I think it's about the corruption and depravity of Tinseltown and how, men are portrayed in film during that time and that sort of that machismo. It's everyone accepts it. They accept these characters that are glamorized in Hollywood as like the tough guy with a chip on his shoulder that has issues. He's dark and brooding and a little violent, but in some ways that's seen as sexy. And so it's an interesting commentary on just gender roles at the time, but also on Hollywood and the types of men that they glorify on the screen. I think Laurel's character is really interesting too. She's not a one dimensional character. And in the 1950s, I feel like women in film often are portrayed as fairly one dimensional. And I like the depth of her character. She's got her own set of issues. So Laurel's issues that she brings to this doomed relationship is that she has trouble with intimacy. She tends to leave relationships and not leave them in a healthy way. Like when she meets Dick, she basically is hiding out in this new apartment from the guy that she was, I believe, engaged to. And then she just left him. And we don't get the full backstory, but we get that she just sort of ghosted on this guy and now was in hiding. And she very quickly, instead of taking time to heal from whatever happened in that relationship, falls for Dix and falls for him in the middle of a murder investigation where she knows he's a suspect. So right there, she's got some issues falling for the bad boy, but she has this like runaway bride mentality where she is scared to be in a relationship fully and honestly. And so she gets ready to flee again once she starts thinking Dick. She builds it up in her head that Dix may have murdered Martha Stewart's character. And so she's starting to like plan to run away again. So she's got her own set of issues. What are your thoughts on her character?
Yes, I agree. She's well written and well portrayed. Her problems are interesting. When we're introduced to her as a character and not just someone who lives in Dix's building complex that he's looking at, we see her lying to the police. She says that she saw Dix basically as the murder victim was leaving. She didn't. They had seen each other through the night. Their apartments face each other so they can see each other when they're in the windows or on the balcony or whatever. And from there, she cuts him a significant amount of slack in the relationship because he seems, it's not just that he is the suspect in a murder investigation, it's that she doesn't know him that well and she puts up with a significant amount of fairly abusive treatment until very late in the film.
Because she likes his face. There's a line that says that early on. She's like, I liked your face.
Well, she reminds me a bit of the female archetype from Gothic thrillers, like a movie we reviewed a while ago, Rebecca. She has some of the same traits as the female protagonist in those kinds of stories. Someone who is attaching herself to someone who is usually older and more successful or more in whatever crowd she wants to be in. And then she finds out this person has dark secrets and it casts the relationship in kind of a, you know, gloomy or grimmer light. In this film, these dark secrets aren't all that secret, but she clearly sees Dix as a way to move up. He's a ticket into a part of Hollywood that she's kind of existed on the fringe of.
Yeah, and she's willing to put up with some emotional abuse and potentially physical abuse. You know, as it progresses, he does attempt to choke her towards the end of the film to do that Hollywood climb. As well as I think she's just attracted to the mysterious bad boy, which Dix portrays well. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about, do you think their relationship, so things were exacerbated because of the murder investigation. She became more paranoid that Dix could have killed the coat check girl. Dix becomes more paranoid that she is going to up and leave him after he proposes to her basically to try to keep her in the relationship. So they're both getting paranoid back and forth about one another. Do you think their relationship could have worked even with all their issues if there was no murder investigation that was exacerbating their flaws?
No, Dix is far too violent to ever remain in the kind of stable relationship unless Laurel be willing to put up with being eventually beaten. I mean, it's pretty clear that Dix has been violent towards other women that he's had relations with. There's no particular reason why he wouldn't do that to Laurel at some point. So the best case scenario, as far as best case in the sense the relationship continuing, would be for Laurel just to continue to put up with that kind of treatment. And I don't see how the murder investigation mattered that much. And one reason I say that is that we see Dix as violent long before the killing, right? As I said, when you're introduced to him, he is ready to fight some dude at a stop sign. The other thing is that the story isn't that interested in the importance of the murder investigation. It is always there, but the way it is resolved, which is completely off screen with some other peripheral character just admitting that he killed Mildred, her boyfriend, who's in like a couple of scenes, so it's not completely some rando, but he's a minimal character and it's like a last minute confession. It is very much the kind of Scooby Doo sort of thing where the villain is going to, have his face mask torn off and just say, here's my evil plan if it wasn't for you kids.
It's the plot device to basically, move things along with the relationship for Dix and Laurel. But yeah, it's not that essential. It's sort of a like, oh, okay, her jealous lover boyfriend killed her. Moving on. Let's get back to Dix and Laurel and their relationship drama.
Yeah, it's a MacGuffin, right? Usually a MacGuffin is a thing. For around the same time, you had the Maltese Falcon, which is the archetype of the MacGuffin, where the thing being looked for is not really what the movie's about. In this case, it's your B plot, which, as you said, seems like it's going to be the A plot for the first third of the film. It's just there to give the characters some reason to interact and to set the tone of the drama. But it's really not that important. And that's a long way of answering your question about would this relationship have worked without the murder? It's like, no, because who Dix was had nothing really to do with being suspected of murder. He just was a violent, abusive person.
Right. And Laurel has her own issues that she brought to that, where she accepts that. And she's in some ways thinking her love. I mean, this is a classic movie trope, but the idea that her love can change this guy and soften him up. And clearly that doesn't happen. I love there's this great line. It's foreshadowing that happens like partway through the film when Dix is working on the screenplay he's writing, and the line is, "I was born when she kissed me. I died when she left me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me." And then that line comes back at the end of the film with the twist. But I really liked that they put that in there because it really perfectly captures what is going to be happening to their relationship. It's going to be this intense, passionate, but combustible relationship that only lasts a few short weeks, or at least that's what it felt like on screen. So I thought that was good foreshadowing that they dropped that in the film. Like we knew as the viewer of the film that things were not going to end well for Dix and Laurel.
So, putting on your therapist hat for a moment, how did this relationship play out as far as you looking at this through that kind of professional lens, if you did?
Well, obviously, this is a pretty unhealthy relationship with a lot of red flags. So, this why they have such passion in early on in the relationship, and their passion is great on screen. Like you can't deny the chemistry between Dix and Laurel. Is they've got this new relationship energy, and you can feel the passion between them on screen because of it. And what happens in new relationship energy, or NRE, as we call it, is that people project their own desires and fantasies of what they want that person to be into the relationship, and it's not a realistic look at who that person is. It's definitely a filter that's put onto the relationship, and you ignore the problems and you just focus on the good stuff. So Laurel is focused on how this guy is a successful screenwriter and she's going to help him finish his next script, and he's just so interesting and intense and passionate and a little bit of that bad boy, and she ignores the warning signs of his past violence, which she hears about, right? Like people tell her he has a history of violence towards women. She ignores the signs that of him being violent in the present. And she just keeps thinking through that lens of what she wants this guy to be or is hoping he will be. And Dix too, right? Dix ignores some of the signs with Laurel of her being a social climber, her also getting cold feet pretty quickly and ghosting and leaving a relationship without being honest and transparent with the fact that she doesn't want to be in the relationship. Like he can tell she's pulling away, and instead of calling her out on that in this really well done scene with where he's like cutting a grapefruit fruit with a knife. And it's just like so it's just this really good scene. Which I'll get into the details later, but it's you can tell he like thinks that she is pulling away, but instead of him calling her out on that, he put pulls her in closer by proposing. And it's just like he sees the signs that things are going wrong with her. She sees the signs that things are going wrong with him, but neither is really calling the other out on it and talking about it honestly because of their issues, and they keep trying to ignore those red flags because they have that new relationship energy passion that they want to keep going. So, yeah, it's a very unhealthy dynamic. It's one of those combustible relationships, and we can tell it's not going to end well because of it, but it is fun to watch on screen. Those passionate moments between them are really well acted, and you can feel that energy, even though it's unhealthy. And I think that's the thing is sometimes you can be really attracted to someone and have that passion, not because it's healthy, but because they represent some repetition compulsions in yourself and some old scripts of unhealthy patterns you may have had, like in your childhood or with other relationships. And that can cause that sense of passion and chemistry, not because it's healthy, but just because it's playing those old scripts. And I think that's what happened in this relationship with Dix and Laurel.
And couple that with the cliche of the woman as the fixer upper of a damaged man. And she clearly is set up to have that as a goal, or at least it's one of the motivators she has. It's laid out for her that the problems that he has are not new. There is a scene with the masseuse, Martha, where she lays out that Dix put one of his ex girlfriends in the hospital, I think, with like a broken nose or something. And Laurel's reaction is fairly nonchalant. Laurel clearly thinks that whatever problems Dix had in the past, what he really needed was a good woman. And that is a deeper problematic motivation versus just, well, Dix is successful and I want to be successful in Hollywood, so I can hook up with him. Plus, I like his face.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was portrayed a lot in film with the woman falling for the troubled man, thinking that love was enough to fix that. I think that's a common, we see that today in films too, right? That's a common theme in love stories is that love will conquer all. And if someone has a lot of issues and is troubled and is a bit of that bad boy, that the good girl can come and save him and save that relationship. And that's just simply not true. If somebody has issues, they're going to keep having those issues in the relationship. The relationship won't fix those issues. It will likely exacerbate them and make them worse. And that's what this film shows. The film, true to life, shows that love does not conquer all. It's a tragic ending and it should be. And I think that's one of the reasons I really liked this film is because it doesn't do that false uh ending, that false Hollywood ending that love does conquer all and that you can fix and revise the bad boy. Instead, it shows you that two people with unresolved issues, it doesn't work out. They end up back in a lonely place. I mean, the ending is so great where it's they have that tense scene between them where he almost chokes her to death, and then the phone rings and it's interrupted and she finds out that he wasn't the murderer. And then she said, oh, that would have meant so much to us yesterday, but it doesn't matter now. Like it's already over. It's reached the point of no return. And then you get that final scene where Dix is walking back to his lonely apartment and she says, she twists his lines around that he wrote for the screenplay. I lived a few weeks while you loved me. And they're both back in their lonely places. It was just so well done.
Are you aware of the original ending? And I don't mean the ending from the novel. I mean, the ending as it was originally written and filmed.
I'm not. No, what was it?
So the writing of this movie is, I won't say convoluted. It's kind of a normal process that films, I think, go through. Edmund North wrote a treatment for this movie based very closely on the book, and the book is very different. One of the main differences in the book is that the Dick's character is not a successful screenplay writer. He's writing crime novels, but apparently has never actually written one. It's all just kind of an excuse to have his father, I believe it is, keep sending him money. But more importantly, Dix in the novel is a psychopathic serial killer, which Dix in the film is not. So North wrote an adaptation that was very close to the source novel. Apparently, it was pretty short because when he was interviewed about the film, like in the 90s, he barely remembered working on it. It sounds like it was like kind of a weekend job, right? Probably made a few $1,000s and he was done and he's off production. Andrew Salt comes in and radically changes what the story's about. And it's a lot closer to what we see on the screen. He made the mistake, though, of telling Humphrey Bogart how he needed to prepare for the role. Apparently, there was a meeting in the home of the director with Bogart, and Bogart loved the adaptation, did not like this writer telling him how to do his job. So even though Salt's script was picked up, he was never on the set. And Nicholas Ray did a lot of rewrites on the set. The ending is radically different in Salt's screenplay in that Bogart kills Graham. So he
Ah,
strangles her.
interesting.
And he finds out that the police have determined that he didn't kill Mildred because Brub shows up at the apartment. He sees him sitting there finishing off the screenplay and finds Laurel's body in the bedroom. So a radically different ending. What do you think about that? Would that have worked better?
No, this ending, I like the ending as is. The fact that it leaves that mystery of just how violent is Dix and how much was the unhealthy relationship pushing him to the edge versus just his own unhealthy who he is as a person. And it's more tragic that he's wasn't a murderer and that everything else and all their other issues between them got in the way of them being able to have a healthy relationship. And the two of them, the doom lovers, walking back to their lonely places and their unresolved issues, I think that's just a more interesting ending. It's poetic in some ways versus just, the murder. Because this film isn't about a murder, it's about the death of a relationship.
The ending as written is too clean in the sense of it just wraps everything up. And Dix's character, there's still a certain ambiguity that would have been destroyed if you actually had him murdering Laurel. We've seen him go up to the brink of killing somebody. We see that there is something off with how he interacts with people. There's a scene early in the film, right after Mildred's been killed, and Brub comes to get Dix to go to the police station and do like a initial interrogation. And we come into the interrogation part of the way through it. And the way they're interacting, Dix is kind of nonchalant about what's going on, and it's initially implied that he doesn't know that the woman he was with just a few hours ago is dead because he is so flat and cold about it. But as the scene plays on, you realize, oh, no, he knows she's dead. He just doesn't really care. Or does he? Because as soon as he leaves, he goes and gets flowers to be sent anonymously to this woman's mom. The reason I'm going through all this is that it kind of shows that Dix is shown as a complex person. He has a lot of negative traits, and in the end, I do think that he deserves to be alone because there is this violence that he's just not going to get rid of. But he's not a black hat. He's not a villain. He's a complex, messed up person. To have the ending that Salt wrote would have pretty much taken all that away. And the ending we get maintains that ambiguity and is both more in keeping with that tone of the film and also it's a lot more satisfying. I would have probably still liked In a Lonely Place with the original ending because of the acting and writing and all that, but it wouldn't have stood out as much.
Agreed. I 100% agree with that. It's more satisfying to have that ambiguous ending that imitates life more, where people are they're not all most people aren't all bad and all good. They're a mix of this gray space, and some are a little bit darker than others. And this film showed that well. I did want to bring up, now that you mentioned how the director rewrote the ending, I wonder how much art imitates life here in terms of what inspired Nicholas Ray, the director, to rewrite the ending. So, some just interesting, like, behind the scenes facts is that Gloria Graham, who plays Laurel Gray, was his wife at the time of this film. And in real life, their marriage was on the fritz. They were separated and they reconciled multiple times. Like, you got the sense that it was a fairly unhealthy relationship over like 4 years. And during the film, he actually slept on set as a result of their separation. And so he too was dealing with this doomed romance to this beautiful starlet. And you wonder maybe if he wrote some of their unhealthy dynamics into the film. Because Gloria Graham, was married 4 times. So she had some issues in real life. And her fourth and final marriage was to the actor Tony Ray, who was the son of Nicholas Ray. So, a little odd. She like married former stepson. So we know there's some issues. So maybe this is an example of art imitates life, but his doomed relationship to Gloria Graham worked really well in terms of informing the script and the change to the ending.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to know exactly how much of Ray's direction and any rewrites he did were directly informed with the personal drama, but definitely what was going on behind the scenes with them, it's hard to see how that would not have informed his view both of a decaying relationship, but also this in general, how men and women interact and how they frequently hide parts of their lives from each other, even if they're in a committed relationship. I believe the two of them first got together while they were each married. So I believe it started as an affair that then turned into a marriage that then turned into a disaster. But that kind of goes back to the old writer's adage, right? You write what you know. He definitely would have to have taken some of what was happening in his life at that time and applied it to a very similar circumstance in the film, which gives it some of its realism, the reason why it resonates with us. And I think it's one of the reasons why he rejected the simpler ending. Because, as you said, relationships, when they end, a lot of times there is ambiguity there. There's not this big black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, it's all your fault. It is much more a, well, it's a relationship. So you have each party contributing to why a relationship failed.
Yeah, I mean, it's messy. A relationship tends to end because both people didn't fully work out their stuff. And there are things you're going to miss about that person, and things that you're definitely not going to miss. And I think when a relationship ends, sometimes people are more black and white about it. Like, oh, he's an asshole, he cheated, bye. But a couple months later, when they reflect on it, they remember some of those other moments. Most, I mean, there are some very, very horrible relationships, but most relationships have that ambiguity in them where there's the good and the bad, and it's whether or not the good outweighs the bad. Is it worth staying in the relationship, or does it get to the point where the bad is just too much and overshadows the good? And obviously, in the situation with Dix and Laurel, the bad overshadowed anything that was salvageable in their relationship. And it's tragic, but true to life. So, do you have anything else in terms of plot analysis that you'd like to talk about, Jeff?
No, I think we can move into our wrap up. So, what was your favorite scene?
So I alluded to this scene earlier, but I didn't go into detail with it because I wanted to save it for my favorite scene. But it's the grapefruit knife proposal scene. It's so well acted and getting at that tension between these two doom lovers. So a lot is said with body language and tone. So the scene opens, and this is like further on into the film where things are unraveling between them, and she really suspects that he's the murderer and is preparing to leave him. And you see that Dix is in the kitchen, slowly cutting up a grapefruit with a knife, and she's standing back watching him with this knife suspiciously. And she asks what happened to the grapefruit knife, and why it straightened, because it's supposed to be purposely curved. It was just like these little subtle things that she's wondering, what is he doing with knives? And then she talks about how I finished this script and I liked the love scene. And then Dix, still with the knife, is says a good love scene should be about something besides love. Anyone looking at us can tell we are in love. But the way he says it, there's like a question. Like he raises his voice at the end. He says it with like this subtle uncertainty where you know that he's not sure if they're still in love, but he doesn't want to fully come out and say that. And then because he's afraid she's going to leave him, he proposes to her awkwardly in that scene, basically saying our housekeeper thinks we should get married so she can come and clean the house. That's his shitty proposal. And he sort of forces Laurel to say yes. Like it's this tense moment where he like Laurel tries to avoid the question. The coffee starts percolating over, so she distracts herself with that. And there's just it's this tense scene where he grips her tightly, like grips her arms tightly, and he sort of passionately threatens her. And so she says yes when she really means no. And as a viewer, you feel the doomed romance percolating just like the coffee is. It's such a great scene. It's worth watching this movie just for how well acted that scene is and what it says about people whose relationship is doomed, but they're not being honest in their conversations with one another about that. What about you, Jeff? What was your favorite scene?
I really enjoyed the opening sequence from when the film fades in and we get a view of LA as Dix is driving through it. We have the scene at the stop sign, almost violence. And then we go to a restaurant where Dix knows a bunch of people and the initial proposal for this writing job comes through. It's a very efficient set of scenes that sets up most of the main characters. There are a couple that we have not yet met, but that'd be Brub and Laurel. But we do see Dix, we do see Mel, we see Mildred, who is the coat check girl and at the restaurant and future victim. But through acting and dialogue and the way the scenes are shot, we get a really, really good sense of who Dix is and the world he moves in, and it's a great foundation for that character and for the rest of the film. So, what's your least favorite scene?
So I call this like the Charlie the thespian scene. There's this comic relief character, Charlie, who's Dix's washed up actor friend, and he's, I guess, this Shakespearean actor, and he comes into a couple scenes throughout the film, staying in like Shakespearean character. And I get that maybe it's supposed to be just sort of lightening the mood of this film, but it felt so tonally off to me. And it interrupted the film. Like it pulled me out of the film instead of adding comic relief. Like this film doesn't need comic relief. It's not that type of film. It's a film. It's a film noir about doomed lovers with a B plot murder. And so I just really didn't like this addition of this Shakespearean actor and trying to add some comic relief. What about you, Jeff?
I really enjoyed this movie. So, my least favorite thing is fairly minor. It takes place during a scene I described earlier, the dinner party with Dix, Brub, and his wife, in which Dix is talking through how Mildred was killed, and Brub and his wife are kind of reenacting it. There is a lighting effect, like a pin light on Dix's face, which is really out of place for a film that otherwise eschews any of kind of artsy cinematography. Everything else in the movie just works really well. So I gave this 5 out of 5 washed up writer pandas. It's just a great movie, great acting, great dialogue. I can keep putting great in front of everything. It's a film that anyone who has a love for cinema, for efficient storytelling, or for a very insightful and concise examination of a toxic relationship, this is a film to seek out. Just a masterpiece. What about you, Steph?
I agree. This is a great film. Highly recommend. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 pandas. Solid acting and script, great character study on the flaws between two people that lead to a doomed romance, all nested within a film noir framework. It just lost half a point for the Shakespearean dude that was totally off for the film. But other than that, this is definitely a watch for me as well. Okay, Jeff. Well, what do we have coming up next week?
Next week, we'll be reviewing A Simple Favor, currently streaming on Amazon. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2021.